Hi, it's Northern Ireland summertime, sunburn one day and a flooded garden the next. You know, we plan for better weather and we hope for better weather, but if we don't have a plan B, our wee event is going to get ruined. Probably like most of us, you have had a barbecue that's ended up inside with 4 George Foreman grills in the kitchen and a brave barbecuer outside under the gazebo. We just have to learn to adapt. And as we mature and grow in life, we learn that those are things that we need to do. We need to plan, as the saying goes, for all weathers. As we're looking at this series of loving others in our sermons, this is my 3rd one and probably my final one in this series for you guys. So I'd love to bring some challenges and some personal thoughts that you can take away that will be really relevant to right now in this COVID situation that we're in, but hopefully thoughts and wisdom that you can take throughout the rest of your life as you support other people and as you love other people in the way that we're able to at the minute. We're going to look back at 1 Samuel 17 and King Saul and David and glean some more wisdom from that. There's such a great story there in 1 Samuel 17. But really the main thought that I want to bring with us today is if you're fighting an issue and not creating change, then you're not fighting it the right way. If you're fighting an issue and you're not creating change, then you're fighting it the wrong way. And we need to look at how we can fight those things in the right way. We've all been in situations where we've struggled, where we've brought our best, where we've even said, I am doing the best I can, I have no more to give, what is it going to take? And that doesn't mean that you haven't genuinely been bringing yourself, it doesn't mean that you haven't genuinely loved or cared, but it means that maybe you need to look at it from a new perspective. Maybe you need to bring the grill inside and cook your burgers instead of standing out in the rain wondering why you keep getting wet. I'll probably use that analogy as we go because I feel like it's really relevant for us right now. So this is the basis of what we're going to think about today. You know, if you're loving another person and supporting them in a difficult situation, then we have to know that we're equipped to bring change and create change rather than control the situation from them. And if anybody is familiar with the story of King Saul and David, you'll understand where I'm going with this. You'll understand that King Saul tried to get David to fight the battle his way. But we're going to read through the story in a wee minute and you can get all that stuff from it yourselves. I really would love us to focus on the interactions of David and King Saul and around that fight with Goliath because there's so much content in there that gives us so much insight that we can take away and adapt to so many situations. It's a battle between good and evil. There's a giant threatening to destroy life, a seemingly hopeless situation. There's a king, someone who has wisdom and experience, but in that moment, it's not taking them anywhere, it's not serving the nation. And then an inexperienced person who is quite, maybe almost arrogant, but really confident in what he knows. So we'll start 1 Samuel here. I'm going to read this out so you can follow along, you can read along, whatever works for you at the minute. The Philistines now mustered their army for battle and camped between Soka in Judah and Azekah in the Hephes Dammim. Saul countered by gathering his Israelite troops near the valley of Elah. So the Philistines and the Israelites faced each other on opposite hills with the valley between them. Then Goliath, a Philistine champion from Gath, came out of the Philistine ranks to face the forces of Israel. He was over 9 feet tall. I'm 5'3", so that'll probably be way higher than this room that I'm even standing in. He wore a bronze helmet and a bronze coat of mail and weighed 125 pounds. Coat of mail, not Goliath. He also wore bronze leg armour and he carried a bronze javelin on his shoulder. The shaft of his spear was as heavy and thick as a weaver's beam, tipped with iron spearhead that weighed 15 pounds. His armour bearer walked ahead of him carrying a shield. Goliath stood and shouted a taunt to the Israelites. "Why are you all coming out to fight?" he called. "I'm the Philistine champion, but you're only the servants of Saul." He really knew how to undermine them. He knew how to say the things to them that would really shrink their confidence. "Choose one man to come down here and fight me. If he kills me, then we'll all be your slaves. But if I kill him, you'll all be our slaves. I defy the armies of Israel today. Send a man who will fight me." When Saul and the Israelites heard this, they were terrified and deeply shaken. They had been quite a successful army to this point and they faced this giant who said one-on-one. And there's maybe a chance that their armies could have fought each other, but when it was just Goliath, this giant, this one singled out giant, facing one singled out Israelite, they didn't feel like they had a match for him. So now we go to verse 12 and we see what Jesse and David are doing. David was the son of a man named Jesse. an Ephraimite from Bethlehem in the land of Judah. Jesse was an old man at that time, and he had 8 sons. Jesse's 3 oldest sons, Eliab, Abinadab and Shimea, had already joined Saul's army to fight the Philistines. David was the youngest son. David's 3 older brothers stayed with Saul's army, but David went back and forth so he could help his father with the sheep in Bethlehem. I think it's interesting to note here that there are 4 other sons in between. There's the middle sons as such, and I suppose we can assume that they were in the fields caring for the sheep, because it says that the oldest brothers went to join the army, so they probably weren't regularly already in the army, and David went back and forth. And what that says to me is that David wasn't particularly valuable at either. There was the sons that went to fight and the sons that stayed to tend and maintain the family business and keep them all fed and watered. David wasn't particularly significant in either of those camps because he could go back and forth. For 40 days, every morning and evening, the Philistine champion strutted in front of the Israelite army. One day Jesse said to David, "Take this basket of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread and carry them quickly to your brothers, and give these 10 cuts of cheese to their captain. See how your brothers are getting along and bring back a report on how they're doing." David's brothers were with Saul and the Israelite army in the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines. So David left the sheep with another shepherd and set out early in the morning with the gifts as Jesse had directed him. He arrived at the camp just as the Israelite army was leaving for the battlefield with shouts and battle cries. Soon the Israelite and Philistine forces stood facing each other, army against army. So David left his things with the keeper of the supplies and hurried out to the ranks to greet his brothers. As he was talking to them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, came out from the Philistine ranks. Then David heard him shout his usual taunt to the army of Israel. As soon as the Israelite army saw him, they began to run away in fright. "Have you seen the giant?" the men asked. "He comes out each day to defy Israel. The king's offered a huge reward to anyone who kills him. He will give that man one of his daughters for a wife, and the man's entire family will be exempted from paying taxes." Now that's huge. To be connected by marriage to the family elevates the status of a family, and to be exempt from paying taxes is huge because that's the main income that helps run a country. And in those days, they had a lot of taxes to pay for a lot of things that the royal family would have enjoyed. So David asked the soldier standing by, "What will a man get for killing this Philistine and ending his defiance of Israel? Who's this pagan Philistine anyway that he's allowed to defy the armies of the living God?" Now just in the previous verse we've heard that David already knew, because he had already heard what a man would get for defeating Goliath. So he went to the soldiers and said, "What was that again?" Now, I don't know if you spent much time around kids, especially when you're eating something nice or something they want. You know, they come over to you and they're like, "What's that on your plate?" Or, "Oh, I wonder what that cake tastes like." They know exactly what it tastes like. They know exactly what's on your plate, and they're telling you, "I want some of that." But they're not just going to come out and say it. And this is what David was doing. He was saying, "What will a man get for doing that?" So David got the same reply. They said, "Yes, that's the reward for killing him." But when David's oldest brother, Eliab, heard David talking to the men, he was angry. "What are you doing around here anyway?" he demanded. "What about those few sheep you're supposed to be taking care of? I know your pride and deceit. You just want to see the battle." So here you have the typical sibling rivalry. The oldest brother, Eliab, he was really angry because he knew what David was up to, and he knew that he was just trying to find out some stuff. He's maybe going to cause a bit of trouble. Well, he thought he knew. But that's what we do in our siblings sometimes. And he called him out on it. He said, "You're just full of pride and deceit. You just want to see the battle." And David wasn't taken seriously by his brother. And probably with some reason that probably made a bit of sense. So David says, "What have I done now?" David replied, "It's only asking a question." And I don't know if you've ever been in a conversation or overheard your own children talking about it. "What now? I was only saying this. I was only doing that." And he was trying to brush it off as if, "You don't know what you're talking about. I was only doing this very minimal thing that doesn't make no sense of importance. I was only asking a question." So in verse 30 it says, "He walked over to some others and asked him the same thing and received the same answer. Then David's question was reported to King Saul, and the king sent for him." So, when your child goes and asks you, "Oh, what's that in that box down there?" and then goes to another person in the house and says, "What's that in that box down there?" and then goes upstairs and asks another parent, what's that in that box down there? The parent upstairs, not knowing that it's been asked quite a few times, will say, oh, I think that child wants what's in that box down there. Yes, you can go and get that. The report always goes back to someone who can give permission. And that's what David was doing. He was the youngest of 8 brothers. So he had to find ways of making his needs known and making his wants gotten. So he knew he had to ask lots of questions and just put it out there a little bit that this was what he was interested in. And sure enough, it went back to King Saul. So King Saul sends for David. In verse 32, don't worry about this Philistine, David said to Saul. I'll go fight him. Don't be ridiculous, Saul replied. There's no way you can fight this Philistine and possibly win. You're only a boy and he's been a man of war since his youth. But David persisted. I've been taking care of my father's sheep and goats, he said. When a lion or bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club. I rescue the lamb from its mouth, and if the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and I club it to death. I've done this to both lions and bears, and I'll do it to this pagan Philistine too. For he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and bear will rescue me from this Philistine. And so what David cleverly does is here, he brings in God. And Goliath at this point hasn't mentioned them being an army of God or anything to do with their faith or their traditions of worship. But David knows when he calls that out with King Saul that it'll be taken a little bit more seriously. He's saying, I'm going to stand up because they're fighting our very system that we're built on. We're a nation of God, we're God's chosen people, and I'm going to stand up and defend us. And that will make Saul a little bit, oh, I haven't said that. I haven't been the one to come out and say that. So it makes Saul think, but also his story about all the things that he has achieved, and knowing that shepherds do have to face all those dangers, they strike a chord with Saul. So Saul finally consents. All right, go ahead, he said, and may the Lord be with you. We're not really 100% sure what tone this is said in, but either way we know he sent him out and we said, may the Lord be with you. Then Saul gave David his own armour, a bronze helmet and a coat of mail. David put it on and strapped the sword over it and took a step or two to see what it was like, for he had never worn such things before. I can't go in these, he pressed to Saul. I'm not used to them. So David took them off again. And that was a bit of the focus from my first sermon in this series about how Saul, when he was trying to help David, put his own armour onto David because he knew what was best. And Saul genuinely knew that was best because when Saul went out to fight, that's what he needed. And sometimes when we're going to help other people, we put on them what we think is best for them because we know it helps us, and we don't take a minute or time to listen to what does that person really need, what are they saying, and how can I help them in what they need. And that's what we're going to look at a little bit more today, but from the other side, because David knew what he needed, and he knew what to step out in, and he knew what he was confident in. So he took it off again, and that's such an important phrase. David took it off again. It's really important that when we're in a situation where we're loving others, where we're caring for other people, that we allow them to take off the things that are weighing them down. We allow them to remove the expectations that have been placed on them by well-meaning people, maybe throughout their childhood, throughout their educational life, out their career, whatever the situation is in the relationship, that there's expectations that get placed on us by really well-meaning people, by people who care and love for us, but those things weigh us down. And maybe it's only even in those moments that those things weigh us down, and we have to allow people to take them off again, because that wasn't helping him. That was actually going to make it worse for David. It wasn't going to bring him the victory that he went on to get. So in verse 40 he says, he picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and put them into his shepherd's bag. Then, armed with only his shepherd's staff and sling, he started out across the valley to the Philistine. Goliath walked out towards David with a shield bearer ahead of him, sneering in contempt at this ruddy-faced boy. Am I a dog? He roared at David. You come at me with a stick? And he cursed David by all the names of his gods. Come over here and I'll give your flesh to the birds and wild animals, Goliath yelled. And David replied to the Philistine, you come at me with your sword and spear and javelin, but I come at you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Today the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you and cut off your head. And then I will give the dead bodies of your men to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. And everyone assembled here will know that the Lord rescues his people, but not with sword and spear, This is the Lord's battle and he will give it to us. Now I'm thinking about Braveheart, I'm thinking about Gladiator and all those movies where Lord of the Rings, where there's a leader who runs up and down on his horse or whatever, his chariot in front of the armies and gets them mustered up ready for war. He gets them believing that they can win. He reminds them who they are and what they're capable of. And this is exactly what David is doing. He is going out to fight the battle by himself, one-on-one, but he is also mustering up the troops behind him. If David fails, they're riled up and ready for war. If David wins, there's still an army to defeat. And David knows he's not the man to defeat the army. He's got this one job and he's going to do it well, but he's making sure that everybody else is ready, that they're not standing in fear and trepidation, that they're psyched up, they're ready, they're believing the things and the common thing that they have together, that the army of the Lord, he gets them to come together over that. He gets them excited about those things. So, verse 48, as Goliath moved closer to attack, David quickly ran out to meet him. Reaching into his shepherd's bag and taking a stone, he hurled it with a sling and hit the Philistine in the forehead, and the stone sank in. Goliath stumbled and fell face on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with only a sling and a stone, for he had no sword. Then David ran over and pulled Goliath's sword from its sheath, and David used it to kill him and cut off his head. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they turned and ran. Then the men of Israel and Judah gave a great shout of triumph and rushed after the Philistines, chasing them as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron. The bodies of the dead and wounded Philistines were strewn along the road from Shaaraim as far as Gath and Ekron. Then the Israelite army returned and plundered the deserted Philistine camp. David took the Philistine head to Jerusalem, but stored the man's armour in his own tent. So David knew what he was doing again. He let the army go on because he knew he wasn't trained for battle. He did the thing that he could do, and he did what he said he would do. He cut off the Philistine's head to take it back and show King Saul, I've done it. But he stored the armour in his own tent. Now, that armour was bound to be huge. Goliath was a giant. He stored it for a reason, and he took something to remind him that he had beat that giant, that he had got a prize of war, that he had survived, that he had overcome, and that there was something to be gained for him. As Saul watched David go out to fight the Philistine, he asked Abner, the commander of the army, Abner, whose son is this young man? I really don't know, Abner declared. They weren't anybody that Saul knew of. We'll find out who he is, the king told him. And as soon as David returned from killing Goliath, Abner brought him to Saul with the Philistine's head still in his hand. Tell me about your father, young man, Saul said. And David replied, his name is Jesse, and we live in Bethlehem. So we're going to end that part of the reading there, and there's so much in there that you could go over that and spend some time. Really read the story, let the story sink into your heart and find your place in that story, because there's so much in there that is so applicable for loads of parts of our lives. And so what I want to draw our attention to here is that David knew his place of power. He needed to be confident in that, and he needed to take off King Saul's armour. It literally weighed him down. And so today, you know, what situation are you in where the people in your life, or maybe yourself, are weighed down by something that it doesn't fit? It's not who you are. It's not bringing light and life to the situation that you're in. And it might feel difficult to take off because it's been given to you by someone who cares. It's been given to you by someone who's trying to equip you. Are you the person that's maybe giving something to someone in an attempt to equip them, but they're saying, this is not for me, this is not how I'm going to be able to do this? So we must really, when we love other people, one of the first things we really need to do is listen to them, because they know themselves. They may not be coping at that time, but they know themselves. And it's really important that we don't come in arrogantly and say, I know better than you. What King Saul knew was that his usual methods weren't going to be successful, and he needed to adapt. So he knew he wasn't too arrogant to say, take the armour off. He could clearly see it wasn't working. So that's why it's so important, you know, to go back to our barbecue in the rain. You know, you can stand out in the rain and try and do a barbecue, but you know, you might cook a sausage eventually. If the rain doesn't put the barbecue out, maybe you're under a gazebo and you've got some type of shelter, but the people who are there, the purpose that you're gathered for, it's not going to really be a success. No one's going to want to join that. And so King Saul could have forced David to go out in the armour, and he could have drudged his way out, but he wouldn't have been able to do what he needed to do. He needed free arms, he needed free movement and everything it takes the fire slingshot. King Saul wasn't too arrogant to know that. He listened to David. He paid attention to the situation and he focused in on what was happening, not how he felt the battle was going to be best won. And so when we're loving other people, I just can't say that enough. You know, listen to what they're saying. Pay attention to what's happening. See how they need to fight the battle, because we have all been created. We've all got our strengths and capabilities, but they're different than each other. Half the battle is knowing that you can win. And that's why Saul risked sending David out. He was a young boy. He wasn't old enough or in a position in his family enough to be sent to be one of the soldiers in the battle. He went back and forth. No one knew who his family was, so there was no favour. There was no, oh, that's such and such a son, you know, I need to do him a favour, let the boy have a go. There wasn't anything like that. David had a confidence. David knew what he was facing. He knew what it was similar to, because he hadn't faced a giant man before, but he knew that he had faced other things and he knew what he did to beat them. He needed someone to say, I believe in you, I am going to let you do this and you have my backing. And having someone's belief helps you believe in yourself. So there was a dual thing going on there as well. He let David fight the battle. And that is really hard when we're loving other people, is to let them fight the battle. Is to stand back and say, I'm here with you, go and fight the battle, and I'm here with you. That's a really, really hard thing to do, because often those of us who are in a position of helping, we care for other people, we love other people, but we're helpers. We want to be in there in the middle of it, doing it with them, and we want to be in there, do it this way, do it that way. But Saul stood back. He was an experienced king. He knew how to fight battles. He knew how to win battles. So he let this kid go off with no armour, with just a sling, the thought of some stones, and he let him do it because he listened to him and he trusted him. And don't you know, if you've been that person on the receiving end and someone has said, I believe in you, I trust that you can do this, it gets them through that next little part, knowing that someone trusts you. It raises you up in yourself. And then David went out and did the same thing with the Israelites. He didn't turn around to them and say, you can do this, but he gave them that speech that reminded them of who they were and what they were capable of. And then they did. They went out and did it. So when it comes to loving others, we have to really remember there's two parties and both have a part to play. Both have strengths, and those things will benefit each other. You know, it is going to rain. We know in this country it is going to rain. Bad things are going to happen. I know too many of you to know that you get this. Bad things are going to happen, things that we can't control. And often what we try to do is control the part that we can't control, and that's so frustrating. We can't turn the rain off. So why are we standing in the rain trying to barbecue? We can't control the weather. We can't control the bad things that happen to us, but we can control ourselves. We can control our thoughts, our steps, the things that we're willing to step out and do, the things we can believe about ourselves, the things that we know that God has given us, these abilities and skills and talents, and just the fortitude in our own character, the quiet strengths. God has given us those things. We're created in His image, so we can step out in those things. The perfect situation would be that there was no battle, you know, or that the battle would happen the way King Saul was used to battle happening, but he couldn't control that. So for us, you know, when we latch onto these expectations of how life should be, we can be so often disappointed. And we can have people in our families, people that we care about and we work with, who are so disappointed by how life has turned out. But in them is something great, in them is something of strength, in them is something of creativity that they have to bring to their life, that can bring joy and bring light into their life. And so if we listen to each other, if we lean on each other, and if we genuinely love the other person, then working together and bringing our full characters, then we can get through the difficult times together. If you're fighting an issue and not creating change, then you're not fighting the right way. So learn how to fight a different way. Find the place of power that you're supposed to be in. Find the place of power that you've used in the past, that the person you're loving has used in the past before. Find out what that power is. Find out what that strength is. And then instead of giving up, like King Saul and David, you can win that battle. And so thanks for listening today. I hope there's something in there that you can take away, and do feel free to get in contact and ask questions and have chats. You know, all of us at Carrick Community Church, the leadership team, we're here for you, and we'd love to meet up with you soon and really see how you're getting on. We've all faced our own battles over this situation with COVID, and we've all had our own struggles to get through, and you know, we've relied on the support of each other and our family. So we're genuinely here for you, and we care about you. So, you know, we're here to listen and help. Take care.